it's a really important topic. What we There's the first slide. The topic today is really restoring native habitats and ecosystems, but we can't do that until we get rid of the invasives. So that's where I come in, and I'll point these out as we go along. But boy, they're all over Berkshire County, and they're doing a lot of damage. I will warn you, though, once you see some of this stuff, you won't be able to unsee it. So you'll go for a walk in the woods and you'll go, oh gosh, and you'll be very tempted to start pulling stuff and you'll never get your walk done. And people don't like walking with me in the woods because I can't help pointing it out and saying how bad it is. We were doing a hike up in Lanesboro, I think it was Constitution Hill last year, and somebody said, oh, smell that. Isn't that wonderful? And we looked over and there was this whole hillside full of white flowers. And I said, oh no, that is multifloral rose. It's awful. And as we came around and did our walk, there were other sections where you could see it had just taken over. And the problem is it chokes out other good things. So the definition of an invasive species is the things that cause harm. So they can be all different kinds of things, amphibians, plants, fish, fungus, bacteria. I don't know, I think algae too. I don't know if you ever heard the thing, Freddy fungus and Alice algae. Got, they took a liking to each other. And so they went out on a limb and took a liking to each other, and now the relationship is on the rocks. So how do they? What happens? They harm the environment because they choke out resources, and it becomes a monoculture. So I don't know if you've ever seen on the news where, like out in California, where they plant all the almond trees, and then they have to import bees. So they have to transport truckloads of bees far distances, which is very stressful for the bees to pollinate this area. Once those blooms are gone on the almond trees, there's nothing there. There's nothing to feed pollinators anymore. So, and they crowd out native plants. We cleared an area, my husband, who's in the back there, and he works very hard on trying to get our little piece of property back in compliance with nature. All of a sudden this year, I'm seeing these little white flowers. They're bloodroot. They're a native, and they're beautiful little things. And now that he's cleared out this whole area, this bloodroot is starting to pop up. It's beautiful. It's a spring ephemeral, and it's really, really lovely. And they reduce the shelter and food for the creatures that inhabit this area. You can spend an awful lot of money trying to get rid of this stuff, just in manpower alone. And we're not going to talk yet about what do you do about some of these things. Not all non-natives are bad. Honeybees are imported. We never had honeybees on this continent. They're imported from Europe, Russia. Apple trees are another thing, but they don't take over. Apple trees just don't take, they don't spread. So, you have to, this is such a huge subject to know what to plant, How did non-native plants and things that spread, how did they get here? Well, when we built our house in Lee about 30 years ago, after the house was built and we were there for about a year, we hired somebody to come in and we said, plant some nice bushes around and make it look pretty. So what did they do? They planted euonymus, which is burning bush. I'll show you what that looks like. They planted barberry. What else did? Oh, and what's that? Yeah, we'll show you what that looks like. Yeah, winged euonymus, and you'll see that. And people think it's lovely because in the fall it turns pink, reds and pinks, and it does look pretty in the woods. But there again, there's sections where it takes over. Barberry is, oh, it's nasty stuff because it has all these tiny little prickers on it. There's a section in Pleasant Valley. I don't know if you hike in Pleasant Valley, but golly, there's a section that I've been hoping they would get after because it's just taking over this huge area of Pleasant Valley. So, you know, people plant these things by accident and then the birds take the seeds and go off and they're dropped in the woods, and that's how it gets spread.
I mentioned
Yeah, please, yes.
Your boots,
Yeah,
your shoes,
yeah,
your clothes,
yeah.
your tools.
Mm.
The best tool for getting rid of any of the invasive plants is a fork. You can do a lot with this to loosen up. But also you have to remember that if you're leaving the area and going home, you want to make sure you clean it, wash it, put alcohol on it, anything, because little bits of root or soil that may be left on your tool from where you were working is now back in your yard. So you want to be aware of that. So cleanliness. Cleanliness with your tools. It's just, you know, just think of it as washing your dishes. So you're working in something that's not so good and dirty, like these guys. Wash them off. So just to mention that's one of our easiest ways to move things.
And we have, you know, Laurel Lake here in Lee. We have zebra mussels in Laurel Lake. And how did they get there? Well, somebody brought them in their boat. Lots of things have come in on ships and wood pallets, all kinds of things. And did you ever go for a walk and come out with all these things sticking on your clothes, these things? So we transport things too, so we need to be careful of that. Water currents, Japanese knotweed, thank you. I don't know why I have trouble remembering that one. Japanese knotweed, if you cut it, grows along riverbanks, and you see sections along riverbanks where it's just taking over, and that is tough stuff. It'll come right up through the road. It'll take over a road and just crumble the blacktop. But that will travel down a river and seed all along the river. What else we got here? So not everything is, there are trees that are invasive. We have on our property, we have buckthorn. I have some, this stuff, oh boy, do I hate this stuff. These have these thorns on them, buckthorn. I don't know if you want to pass that around. You can see those thorns, buckthorn. Those. And a bigger, you know, and what it looks like when it's growing, this is what the bark looks like, this shiny bark. Yeah, you can come up and see that later. I can't pass that around. But we have buckthorn all over our yard, and it grows into a tree, and it'll come out. The tree will be this big. It only grows about 8 to 10 feet tall. The vines are the things that you see if you're driving down to Great Barrington, Route 7, left-hand side. You can see that where bittersweet has just taken down trees, huge trees. So we have some examples of bittersweet vines here. and that's the bigger version. So you got the small version. This is what it starts out looking like. And then it gets bigger.
And then it could get humongous.
And then it gets humongous. I mean, we've cut things that are this big around. This is not barberry. This is grape. So if you see this bark, this is good. It's native, and it won't take, as big as it gets, it won't take down our native trees. What else we got?
Two vines. If it's grape, you'll see
Oh, yeah.
tendrils.
Mm.
Grapes have the little curly cute tendrils on it. So you'll recognize that as being a grape. If it doesn't have that, it's probably barberry. And barberry almost looks like a snake, the bark. Bittersweet, sorry.
So there are some, so what happens is they get tangled together. So there's actually some grape in here. I was trying to find one of those little tendrils.
I wonder if this,
Here's a little tendril. That's, so those little curly cute things, that's grape. So you know what that looks like. What else we got there, Linda? We didn't bring any bugs or worms today. Aquatic things. Yeah, and so while we do have, so the yellow flowers, that's colt's foot, that's invasive. The thing though about this one though, I do believe it feeds, it's an early bloomer, and it does have some
medicinal qualities.
redeeming qualities.
Some medicinal qualities.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you don't want to plant it.
Yeah, right. But it is an early bloomer, so I think pollinators go for this early. Yeah, yeah.
any of the early bees or butterflies, if they're up and about, this is
However, yeah, the garlic mustard, I don't think that has any redeeming qualities.
Except it's edible.
Oh, yes, yes. I was going to make you some garlic mustard pesto, but I didn't think anybody would go for it, and I didn't want to waste the nuts and the oil. So, oh, so here's some pictures. Oh, one thing we have found at Ferncliff is Asian jumping worms. So they're in Lee. I have actually found them in my garden. There's different ways to, if you find one, I always have garden gloves on, so I don't mind picking them up. I put them in a little container of alcohol, and they just kind of shrivel up. I've also heard you can put them in a plastic bag and just leave them in the sun, and they'll dry out. And one way, if you find one, and one way you can, there's usually more than one, you can make a concoction of water and cayenne pepper and pour it in the ground, and the jumping worms will come up. And they're pretty easy to identify, but first of all by that white ring on them, but also because they do jump. They're kind of twitching all over the place when.
Because they're about 8 inches long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're near the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
What's the problem with them?
They deplete the soil. They don't really do anything good, right? Joan, you can add to that.
Yes, they eat the nutrients that are in the soil, and so it doesn't give the plant roots anything to feed on. In Michigan, at their arboretum, it took down a 25-foot hedge of arborvitae. They just all fell over. And in my garden, like the heuchera, this spring, I just lifted them out. There was no root left in there because that's what they feed on. I had it in my grass. I had to have it all, dug off from the top. But that's why in the woods now, they like the decaying matter. You put that's where I think I got mine from, is compost. And, the eggs are so small, you can't see them. They all die in the winter because they don't like the cold. But what happens is the eggs survive and they come out. in the spring. Yeah, the University of Michigan is doing lots of studies on them, and they still haven't found any effective way to rid them. So I guess
So-
it's an ongoing process. But
So
they're
be-
all over the Northeast.
So be careful when people offer to give you things for your garden. Be careful of where they come from, because that's where I first got a vinca vine. I took some plants that somebody was dividing, and it eventually took over this whole area. And at first I thought it was great. I thought it was a great ground cover. And it's taken, I finally got rid of it in one space, but now it's kind of spread all over my yard. The Asian, the emerald ash borer, you see that log over there? That came from my neighbor's property. I was wondering why he took down these beautiful ash trees. The ash trees were all decayed, were all dead from the emerald ash borer, and you can see that pattern in there. That's the emerald ash borer. Interesting pattern. What else we got here? Zebra mussels, spongy moths. Okay, we've already talked about a lot of these things. Phragmite. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yeah, yeah. They, boy, are they taking over all the waterways. You see them spreading, and what happens is they're choking out the native. I couldn't find any of the cattails that were still together. They've already started to hop out like this. But what happens is the Phragmites are just choking out all the native cattails. Yeah. Those I got by Big Y. And it's very hard to find cattails that you can actually get to, because most of them are in water up to your knees. But over by, and I was surprised to find cattails right there by Big Y. It was nice. Do we have anything to say about purple loosestrife? It's pretty, but takes over everything. We've talked about those are the berries for the bittersweet. We've showed you bittersweet vines and how bad they are and how they just destroy big sections of trees. We've shown you the winged euonymus. This is it down here. Looks pretty, but spreads all over through the woods. And we talked about Japanese knotweed. It grows a lot along rivers, I think. It seems to like water. Barberry is that prickly, prickly. It's a bush. It's prickly.
Small prickle.
Yeah.
And has red berries. But you don't want any of these to get to a berry stage.
Oh, this honeysuckle. Oh my gosh. That is such a nemesis, because you can cut this. You can cut it when it's small, and it just keeps growing. And the roots are, I mean, this is tough stuff. Trying to get rid of this, because you cut it and it just comes back. So I don't even know. So what can we do about all this stuff? Understanding how they're spread. So, preventing things from blooming, cut them before, or let them bloom and then cut them so you keep weakening the root. Prevention, don't bring them, know what you're planting ahead of time. Don't bring them, like we did, onto our property. With the garlic mustard, early detection, now is the time to go after garlic mustard, because it hasn't flowered yet, it's small, and it comes out. You can really get the root because the ground is still very moist, and it comes out pretty easy. Stop seed production, and stick with it. You gotta I think maybe just if you can't do everything, just take an area and stick with that area. Be vigilant about that.
Joan,
Yes.
with regard to the garlic mustard,
Yeah. good point.
Leave it on the ground.
No, and you can't put it in compost. I
Not
think,
in a home compost, and I don't know, some bigger places, I think they do, statewide projects, they may have that. But like a lot of these things, if we find them in the woods, we can't really truck them anywhere or carry them anywhere. The idea is to get them out of the ground with as much root as possible, and then sometimes it's just flipping it over and hanging it.
getting
Get
it
on a
off the
branch,
ground.
putting it in a pile. We have a pile up in Golden Hill Town Forest that guys worked on last year of Japanese barberry. It was a massive pile, and now this year it's like dried up sticks, twigs. That's all it is. If you expose the roots, you're going to kill the plant. So that's what you try to do in small doses. I know some people will take the garlic mustard home and try to use it for food, or I suppose you can put it in trash, but that's not a good place.
Yeah, we don't want to be adding more stuff to the trash. Yeah. But putting it on a big rock to let the roots dry out. Yeah.
Sometimes if there's a downed log or
Yeah.
something, or a bush that you can just hang the little bits of them on there, and they dry up really quickly. And that's the end of them. So
I just wanted to say, last year we pulled a bunch of barberry on the path in Ferncliff between St. Mary's and Robert, and we made a big pile. And when I was there last time, I was like, "Where's that pile?" It really just, like you said. Yeah.
Are there any animals that will eat any of these invasive species?
well, plants, for their own safety for the plant, you have the prickers and the spiky things and bad tasting, so animals are not likely to eat that.
But one of the reasons that these are invasive is because in their native ecosystem, there would probably be some checks and balances. So there'd be some animals that ate them, some insects that ate them, but the ones that have become invasive love the soil here so much, and they don't have any natural predators or things that will.
So we need to bring in some invasive species.
That's what's happened. That's what's happened in a lot of places. That's why, in Hawaii and different places, they've tried to do that. The famous story in Australia is they brought in cane toads to eat the rats, and now the cane toads are poisonous and killing all the wildlife across Australia. So it's pretty dangerous to bring in other species.
Just something on the news last week about the spongy moths, bringing in something that will kill the spongy moths, and it's like, oh boy,
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah.
You start mixing up imbalance. You start another
Imbalance, yeah.
Right.
The thing to do is, if you have some of these plants or others and you want to tackle it, start small.
Yeah.
And just try to be as detailed as you can to dig it out, let it dry up. And the other thing is, it's vigilance. You have to, it's not a one-time thing. This is an exercise program.
Stick with it.
You stretch and you load this stuff and carry it. And you do that on a regular basis. You keep at it. Your mind will set, you'll start looking at that area and say, oh, something's coming up out of there. And get them when they're small. And that's the easiest way. But to be vigilant and don't give up. And don't think, I did a great job, look at that. And then the rain comes the next day and you see everything's sprouting up again. So you really have to be vigilant and keep at it. Just think of it as a routine. Try to move it into your day. You do a little bit, and it makes a difference. You'll see the difference, and then you can replace that area with other plants, which I know Katherine will talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to that. And if you run out of things to do on your own property, you can volunteer for BEAT. BEAT does that's Berkshire Environmental Action Team. Every Friday, they are working up at one of the parks in Pittsfield on the kiwi vine. That did a number in Kennedy Park. It took down a whole section. They eventually had to treat it chemically. And next Saturday, Lee Greener Gateway, we're doing a cleanup, and there'll be a number of things, you working in the community gardens or cleaning up some of our streets and park areas, or working on invasives. So we'll be doing that next weekend if you're interested.
And you can see me after.
Yes. And the Green Agers, that's a wonderful group, and they do a lot of work with invasives. Longcoat Park right here in Lee. They've already started working on Longcoat Park.
Shall we say, rejuvenation. It was
Yeah.
neglected for so long.
Mm.
And the Green Agents have been in there working last year, and they will come back again early this summer to finish rerouting the trail. And that property has been very wet. They have put in 2 more bridges over the wet areas and will reroute the trail so it's a little bit easier and stays out of the wet areas. But it's a very nice piece of property. Big tall trees, birds, quiet. But what I saw was plenty of barberry. Bittersweet vines that thick like this. And also what we as gardeners, I'm assuming people are gardeners here, what we were putting in probably 30, 40, 50 years ago was the big things like, Pachysandra, sweet ground cover. Look at how far that root goes from this one little plant. So you know this thing is going to move around. The other thing was vinca vines, which I didn't have any. The little purple flowers, that's another one that's considered invasive now, as well as the sweet-smelling lily of the valley. But so sometimes we are working with the commercial industry maybe, or with, gardening gurus, and everything looks so beautiful and colorful and wonderful, and we want to plant them, and that's fine. But over time, we do see that things can get out of hand. And let it be known that native plants, too, can spread. So, they could take over. So keep your eye out. Again, vigilance. That's all.
And Helia Nursery, I wanted to give them a plug because when we bought our plants, and still today, you can go to a nursery and they're selling things that are invasive, that they shouldn't be selling, And there are some laws. I don't think you can buy burning bush, euonymus anymore in Massachusetts, but in other places you can. But Helia Nursery, they're in Alford, and they're a little hard to find because.
West Stockbridge, yeah.
Is it West Stockbridge?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, they know what they're doing there.
There's the Native Plant Trust, too. That used to be Garden in the Woods, if anybody remembers, in Framingham. It's the Native Plant Trust now, and they save seeds and do things, and they also have native plants for sale. There is also in the Connecticut Valley in Deerfield, there is one of their farms there. So you can go actually there and buy plants, native plants. So they're out here west. So there's different sources.
Yes, and one of the things that I use quite a lot is on my phone I have Seek by iNaturalist, and if you're out and you want to know what is this plant, or it's pretty good on bugs, but it's not so good with trees. I have found, but I think that's a really good resource. But all this stuff that we're talking about, you can find so much stuff online. It's kind of like, really, no pun intended, but getting into the weeds when you get online there. This is a great book for kids about They Are Here. Boy, they talk about the big boa snakes in Florida, and how they have these hunting parties to hunt these snakes. Kids would love this kind of stuff. This is really, really good. And this, unfortunately, this is out of print now, but from the Division of Fish and Wildlife, they have a lot of good stuff online. This is a good resource. What else? Is there anything else? So that's my thing.
Very good.
Okay.
Susan, you
Yeah.
haven't mentioned Bishop's cat.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Bishop's wheat.
yeah, Bishop's cat or Bishop's weed, and that also is highly, highly invasive. And I know on my former property, and a lot of the ones I see around here, people still use it as a ground cover. And you also didn't mention that a good way that I have found to get rid of invasive, especially if it's, like you say, in a patch, is to smother it. Is, you know, to put layers and layers of cardboard and mulch over the top of it and wait for 3 years, and it really will smother it. It might come out a little bit on the edge, but I just keep it a little bit bigger.
There's a lot of things. I mean, like I said, you can really get into the weeds here. There's a lot other plants that we didn't talk about, but there's so many thousands of them that what I tried to do is talk about the ones that are right around here that we see all the time and that are really an issue, kind of.
I mean, I think the thing about this is that it's more about, we'd have to do like a full week kind of workshop, to cover every invasive species. But the thing is, I think becoming conscious of this and starting to understand, it's easy, like when you come to the Berkshires, especially in the summer, it's just so beautiful and lush and green, and we're looking around thinking, what's the problem? And then suddenly, when you start to be interested in the environment and the ecosystem and the native species and the health of those, and you realize that a lot of that green stuff is like a big vine that's covering everything and smothering everything out. And then you're like, oh, okay, it's not just if it's green, it's not just if it's pretty, it's what is it doing for the ecosystem. And so then you start to find out there's so many things out there, like the bishop's weed, or is that the same as goutweed?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because there's also goutweed. I mean, they still sell this in nurseries because these are all really beautiful, mostly all really beautiful plants. They have some ornamental or decorative value, and that's why we've used them, is because it's like, oh, this is beautiful, it's green, it's pretty. So one of the things that we'd like to really convey here too is there's a shift in perspective and a shift in relationship to the landscape, which is one of, I just want to grow things that I like to look at. I just want to grow things that I like to look at. Yeah. Or I'm going to start to grow things that actually support the local ecosystem. So one of the things that is being talked about now, there's a guy named Doug Tallamy. Anybody hear of him? He wrote a book called Nature's Best Hope, and he's a really wonderful writer. He writes a lot about all this, and he said, there's 44 million acres of lawn in the United States. Then that's all our national parks put together, and all of that used to be habitat for plants, soil microbes, insects, birds. So as soon as you don't have the plants, then you don't have the insects, then you don't have the birds because they don't have anything to eat. So you're talking about a huge amount of land that has been converted to basically desert, because lawn doesn't support, it's all non-native grasses. So it doesn't support any of the life that's normally here in this. What were you going to say, Sal?
He's also on YouTube.
Yes, Doug Tallamy.
He's a fantastic lecturer.
Yeah, he's really incredible. Yeah.
I'm hoping that maybe in the fall we could run that. Katherine
Yes.
and I saw him speak.
Yeah.
Well, a video of him speaking.
Yeah.
It was done in Pittsfield,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that we could do that here in the fall. I think
Yeah.
that would really be very
Yeah.
worthwhile.
Well, I'll just reintroduce myself. So my name is Katherine Miller. I have a house on it's 121 High Street. It's got tons of plants in it. I'd give informal tours if anybody wants to come. It's a permaculture and native plant garden on a very small plot. So it gives you people some ideas on how you can do this for yourself. And I'm also the director of Lee Community Gardens. And we grow food for people, but also for pollinators. And you'll see why. So I have some information about that here too. And we're constantly doing things if anybody wants to come and help out or just come and learn, that we'd love to have you. So yeah, I think our relationship to being gardeners or being owners of land, what I'm learning is how to shift that over to a more custodial kind of relationship. Rather, I'm the owner, I want this there, that there, that there. It's like, okay, on paper I own this land, but what is it that I want to create with it? And when I started to understand more about how little habitat is left for the birds that I love, I've become a real bird lover, and I'm like, oh, if I want to see more birds, I'm going to have to plant the kind of environment that they want to be a part of, or that they can survive in. So, let's see what we got here. It's coming, I think. It's doing its thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So we said, what is an invasive? A native is a plant or an animal or a fungus or anything that's living in this environment that's evolved over millions of years, and they create these very complex relationships together. It's trying to embed this in your memory. So they're very mutually beneficial. So we haven't really learned to think this way about our environment. We're like, I really love to have an echinacea growing here, but we don't really think about, well, what kind of soil does that grow well, and what kind of moisture does it need? What kind of insects will come to this if I plant this? What other plants do the insects need? If I plant echinacea that only blooms in the summer, what are they going to eat in the spring? Like Joan was saying about the almond trees. So you start to think about ways that things work in systems. This is just a really broad view of all the different local native pollinator plants, and then you see all the pollinators that are related to them. This is such a small, tiny fraction. I mean, there's thousands of native bees and pollinators and butterflies, moths, and some of them are very much just in one area. And then, so I'm skipping ahead here because you can't really talk about plants and what plants to grow without understanding the insects that are those plants, most of them wouldn't even be around if they didn't have a bee or some other insect to pollinate them. Sometimes it's a bird, sometimes it's a hummingbird that's pollinating, or a bat, but you need those pollinators, or the plants actually cannot survive. They cannot create, they can't reproduce. So I found when I was putting this slide together, I thought, well, we have to talk about the pollinators, otherwise we can't talk about plants. So these are just some statistics, but the main thing to realize is that if we don't have plants, we don't have us. I mean, we don't have the crops, we don't have the food, we don't it just won't exist without these pollinators. So we can import honeybees to do some of our pollinating, but they found that our native bees are way better at pollinating. There's much more fruit, much more seed is produced when our native pollinators are pollinating our food crops. So you can just see here, this was done by the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. They said 45% of our agriculture commodities depend on these native pollinators. So, and then, back in 2018, I don't know if you guys saw, this really switched things up for me, is I saw an article in the New York Times. It was about the insect apocalypse, and it really it just threw me. I just couldn't believe it, because when I was a kid growing up, we used to have to tie scarves across our face when we rode our bikes so we wouldn't swallow all the bugs. There were so many bugs. I mean, I lived, in the countryside. But now, I mean, you rarely ever have to wash your windshield because there's too many bugs on them. They've done these special where they've looked at people's license plates. So they look at license plates from cars all around the country, and they count how many dead insects are on these license plates. And you're talking about 50% of insect population has gone down. I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it's an unthinkable number. And at the same time, the bird population has gone down by billions, like at least a third of our bird population has disappeared. So, this is Doug Tallamy. This is his quote. So what he's saying is those 44 million acres of lawn, if everybody just starts to plant a few more natives, we can actually make a dent. If you converted half of that lawn to what he calls a homegrown national park, you could actually have more land under conservation than in all of our parks put together. So it's kind of a wild, crazy thought, right? That us as just these gardeners, I'm on 2/10 of an acre. It's not a lot, but I've got like dozens of trees and shrubs and hundreds of native plants that I've put on this over the years. And so, you can see the difference that it's making in the number of birds that we have, the number of, butterflies, moths, all these things. So we can do it. Oops. Yes.
Heard of No Mo May?
Yes. Yes, we actually have a little sign here. No Mo May is a wonderful, it's definitely one of the things that we can do, and we have that also as one of our things to think about, because May is coming right up. And I was just heard this woman say a few nights ago, she was saying that she let her lawn grow for the month of May, and she had damselflies and can't even remember all the different insects and fireflies, like amazing. But that's also because she kept some of the areas tall. She didn't mow everything at the end of May, and then she mowed at a very high level for the rest of the year. So one of the things that happens when you start to think of things in terms of as being a caretaker of the land rather than, just following kind of unconscious uniform rules, like lawns have to be this high and they have to look this way. When you stop thinking that way, you can you start to do things a little bit differently. And this is where education comes in, because you have to kind of convince your neighbor sometimes that really is okay to do that and why you're doing it and all that kind of stuff. So you'll notice that places that are starting to do this kind of thing have signage. So they'll put some signs up like No Mo May, this is for the bees, I'm feeding the bees, different things. And it's a really good idea to do that if you're going to try some of these things, because it helps people to understand you're not just a lazy person that hasn't cut their flower stalks down. You're actually somebody who's very consciously trying to create habitat for some of our fellow companions on the earth. So I think if you don't touch this right away, it kind of does its thing. Yeah. So this is where you start to make the connections, because most people see a bug and they're like, okay, squish it, but what we don't realize is that they're actually food. So we had this really amazing thing happen where I had these lupins, and the lupins were covered with aphids. And the first year I tried to get rid of the aphids naturally. I tried because I thought, well, they're killing my lupins. And the second year I was like, if they die, they die. They're not meant to be here, right? And I went out and I noticed one of the lupins was broken over, but there were like no aphids on these lupins. They were all gone, and the birds had eaten them. So for the birds, the aphids are an incredible source of fats and proteins, and the tinier birds can eat like hundreds or if not thousands of them in a day. So the next year we have a chokecherry tree, and that was covered in aphids. I mean, I couldn't even believe, like, how is it possible for a tree to have this many aphids on it? And then we noticed it was just swarmed by all these little birds, and they literally just cleaned it. I mean, there must have been millions of aphids on this thing. They cleaned off every one of them. So now I've taken this approach where, maybe I'll hose off a bush or something if it has a bit too many aphids or things on it. I'll try to understand why it's in that state, but I don't use any of the so-called natural pyrethrin or anything like that, because those actually do kill all the other pollinators as well. So, but it's interesting to see, like, you might lose a plant or two, but usually what will happen is some of these native predators will come in, like you were just saying, it's something that actually is supposed to be here, and they'll take care of it for you. So, so then I'm just learning all about this as well. Like Joan, I'm learning because I'm interested. And I did a workshop with Evan Abramson from Landscape Interactions. He's a really interesting guy, and he has a lot of free materials on his website. I'll have his information at the end, but basically he taught us that the pollen is really food for the babies. They need the pollen for the babies, and a lot of these bees can only use pollen from certain types of plants. And they need that pollen in the spring, so we need to have lots of spring blooming flowers. The nectar is really more about energy for the actual insect itself. So they're collecting pollen for the babies, they take the nectar for themselves, and that's what's giving them the energy. And then leaves, they're providing food for caterpillars. So in the case of euonymus or all these beautiful shrubs that we have, beautiful flowering shrubs, you might see a pollinator on them getting nectar or something, but they can't lay eggs on those. They don't recognize them as food. It's sort of like if I handed you a bunch of caterpillars and said, here's breakfast, you'd be like, that's not food. It's like, but if you try to hand a bunch of these leaves to a moth or a butterfly that would lay their eggs, they're like, that's not food. I need milkweed. I need, these other, Joe Pyeweed. I need all these other native plants. That's my food. This doesn't look like food to me. So if you don't plant natives and you just have flowering plants, you'll have food, but you won't have any habitat. So I started telling this story to people, like, if you try to imagine Lee, and all the buildings in Lee were just restaurants. They're just restaurants, and they only served bread. So, so anybody that came to this town would have to be able to come from further away. They would have to be able to travel here. All they would get to eat was bread. So if you couldn't eat bread, if you were gluten intolerant, you could not come here and eat. If you didn't have transportation, you couldn't come here and eat. If you needed a place to stay the night, you wouldn't be able to come here and eat. So in our gardens, we have these plants, and if they provide a lot of nectar, we're like, oh, this is great. Look, we've got bees, we've got all these things. But what actually happens is those are pollinators that can afford to fly from a greater distance. And then they can go back to somewhere else to sleep. They can go back to somewhere else to feed their kids and to raise them and have habitat for them. Most of our natives, they might travel 100 yards, 200 yards, maybe 500 yards. They've got very small circle where they do all their living. And so we need to figure out in our small yards, in a small space in our yard, okay, what can we grow here that will provide that habitat for those pollinators, since they're only going to travel in this small circle. So, so yeah, they provide the leaves and for food, but then they also provide habitat. And I have friends that come over and they're like, what do you have all these dead sticks hanging out in your yard for? And I'm like, oh, that's for the insects to overwinter, or that's for the insects to have their nests. And I try to keep up a significant amount of that stuff, especially in the back garden where people aren't seeing it so much, so that they can overwinter. And if you remember the jumping worms that Joan was talking about, I just found out recently that oak leaves are one of the things that they don't like. Oak trees are one of, you'll see here in a second, they're one of the best things you can plant for pollinators. Just don't rake up the leaves of any tree, really. Leave the leaves on the ground. That's where all the insects overwinter, and then you'll start to see that life cycle is being completed. So this is what I was saying. It's like the native insects, they just haven't evolved to use these plants. And of course, our classic example is the monarch butterflies. We have all heard about that. They need milkweed. They've evolved to use milkweed, and they have this really special relationship because milkweed's toxic. It's also toxic to monarchs. They've developed a special way to eat the milkweed so that they don't die. But because they eat milkweed, other birds won't eat them because they taste terrible and also they're toxic. So the milkweed gives protection to the monarch, and it also, the monarch lays its eggs on the milkweed and pollinates it. So it has this nice complex relationship. But that's just one example. There are thousands of examples of pollinators and plants that have this kind of complex relationship together, and they can't survive one without the other. And then, what should you plant? Finally, we're going to talk about what you should plant. Some people call me the crazy plant lady, so I have a real love of plants. And I found out through Doug Tallamy, there's species called keystone species. So if you really don't know plants yet, or you're just getting to know plants, or you've loved plants but are just finding out about natives and you just want to start getting some more natives in your garden, keystone species are the ones that support the greatest number of insects. So if you just add one of these plants, like an oak tree, to your yard, you're suddenly going to have increased the potential to create this kind of natural habitat, exponentially. So one of the best resources I've found is the Native Plant Finder. It's also, Linda was mentioning Grow Native Massachusetts, and if you go in there, you can put your zip code in, and they'll list all the flowers, the shrubs, the trees, in order of the ones that have the greatest potential to be of service to these pollinators. So I have a few examples here. So goldenrod. Now, people think of goldenrod and you're thinking of Canadian goldenrod that's 7 feet tall. You definitely want to be careful about that unless you have acres and acres. But there's a lot of goldenrod that actually only grows 2 or 3 feet tall. And there's one called speciosa. Solidago speciosa is called fancy, like special goldenrod. There's some forest ones, zigzag goldenrod, blue stem goldenrod. They're all, and some of these grow like just with partial shade. So there's a lot of things you can do with goldenrod. It supports 125 different pollinators and produces a lot of moths, which produce a lot of caterpillars. So your birds, for example, like a little chickadee needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to fledge their chicks. So if they have 4 to 6 chicks, they need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise those chicks till the chicks can fly. Once the chicks fly, they continue feeding them. Caterpillars are the only food they can eat. It's the only food that has the nutrition, and it's soft enough for them. So
You might want to mention that
yeah.
goldenrod, and if you've seen goldenrod out in a field or a yard, you might see these balls on the stems of the goldenrod.
Right. Yes.
Maybe a ball, or they could be elliptical, and those were caused by the plant reacting to either one of those little flies or wasps, bee flies, laying an egg in the stem. And so that egg in the stem, it has a nice little place to grow in that ball and becomes a larva or a worm. And chickadees and nuthatches in particular know they're in there. So you may see some of these things on the plant and notice a hole. So that was some bird went in there to get it. So goldenrod is a really great fun plant, and it is sweet smelling, and it does not cause hay fever.
No, it's
That's the
yeah.
misnomer.
That's really good. I'm so glad you brought that up because people are afraid often to plant
Things like goldenrod because they say, oh, I have allergies. But then in reality, the goldenrod, the pollen is very heavy and sticky. It doesn't go in the air. So that is not probably what's causing your allergies is more ragweed or some of these other non-native species. So,
Or the ragweed.
Ragweed.
yeah.
It kind of blooms at the same time, but it's kind of greenish. It doesn't look
Yeah.
very pretty. Although the Latin name's ambrosia.
Oh, really?
That pollen is very light. So when the breeze comes by, that's the one that
Yeah.
gets in your nose.
So something like wild strawberry, it's a great ground cover. And the nice thing about that is things will grow through it. So yes, it carpets the ground, but you can also grow taller things through it. It will grow underneath perfectly fine.
Is it edible?
It's edible, yeah. Yeah, you'll get the small berries. And then the wild geranium, that's another one that's really, really beneficial. You can see there's 81 different species supported by strawberry, 27 by wild geranium. So these are things that, will just grow and spread, but without competing necessarily with other things. Other things will grow along with them. So if you have bare spots or things like that, rather than mulching, you can plant these things and they'll cover the ground with a beautiful green carpet. So, and then here's some trees, oak trees, of course. I think Doug Tallamy actually said it's actually over 500 now that they realize that's how many different species of oak. So, and the interesting thing is a lot of times we've been taught to look at, like if we see a young oak tree and we see some holes in the leaves, or we see a caterpillar on it, or we see a gall like on the goldenrod, we think, oh, there's something wrong. Something's attacking this tree. We should get rid of that. The thing is the oak tree can handle it. It's evolved along with these insects. So unless there's something else going on with the tree, it's unhealthy for some other reason, those insects are going to take what they need and the oak tree is going to be just fine. So you don't have to worry if you see those types of things happening. Willow trees can get quite big, but there's also small, bushier willows like sand willows that you can grow, and they're maybe 8 to 10 feet high and 6 to 8 feet wide. So if you have your wetter areas and things like that, it's one of the best trees you can grow. Chokeberry or chokecherry, birds just love the berries. I mean, you'll just have such a beautiful sight if you grow one of these trees. And they say they're edible, but they're pretty mouth puckering. And but you can eat them or give them to your grandchildren. That's fun. So there's many more. Like I said, on this website, there's just tons listed there. So no mow, like you were mentioning, sir, that's a great thing to, even if you don't do your whole lawn, or if you're afraid of conflict with the neighbors, do your back lawn, don't do your back lawn, maybe do your front lawn, but do it higher. I think I've really learned over the years not to get too black and white over things. You drive yourself crazy, you drive other people crazy, do what you can do, start small, so, but these things like stop using pesticides and herbicides, it's just like, look, there's nothing good about them really. I mean, they are going to, yeah, I mean, maybe your lawn won't have dandelion in it, but at the end of a life, did it really matter? And look at all the lives that were prevented from happening as a result of it. So it's just something that we do without thinking. And Lee, the Department of Public Works, they just use vinegar and maybe some Epsom salts or something. So if they have to get some weeds out of an area that has pavement or something like that, they'll just use those kind of things. They still will affect that environment, but they won't have this lasting effect that these pesticides and herbicides have. Start planting some native perennials. Like if you don't want to be a gardener and you don't want to necessarily, learn all about this, look up the plants that are the natives and just plant them. Don't make a big deal out of it, and do what you can. Or if you want something right from the beginning that's a done-for-you thing, greenagers, they'll come and put a pollinator bed in your front yard, backyard, wherever you want to put it, and they'll put the plants in it. And Healy Native Nursery also has a program like that. They have a CSA where you can sign up for it just like a vegetable thing, and every few weeks they'll have your first load of plants that they'll give you, like 8 plants. You come back a few weeks later, they'll give you your second, and then I think you come back towards the end of the summer and that you have your third. And it's a really nice way to not have to figure out what the plant should be. They figure it out for you, and I think they will still also build a bed for you if you want that as well. So you can either just take the plants and plant them yourself, or they'll build a bed for you. That's a great kind of done for you type of thing. And then, like I said, leave the leaves and the dead flower stalks as much as you can. The more you can let that go, the better your habitat is going to be. And control invasives. So, and then these are some resources. Healy Native Nursery, of course. Green, and also you can volunteer there. You can learn a lot by volunteering there. Greenagers, they have a conservation team, so you can hire their conservation team to come in and help with the invasives, but they also do the pollinator and vegetable garden beds. I've heard of a wing and a prayer nursery in Cummington, but I haven't actually been there, but I heard it's very good with natives. NatureWorks Land Care is right in Lee, and there was just I think Beat had a webinar with Richard Lasser, and he's a really, really great guy, but like literally on 102, they do amazing work. And then Landscape Interactions, Evan Abramson, if you go there, they actually have garden plans with all the native species. You can download a PDF of their book that it's all laid out for you. So if you really want to get into it, you can look up his stuff. It's really, really incredible work. Cysz Society, they're an amazing, online resources are incredible. And then Lee Community Gardens, of course, can always come. I'm happy to talk with anybody about any of this stuff. I'll give you a tour of my garden. You can help out on our pollinator pathways on High Street. And then Grow Native Massachusetts, as we said before. That's like a really wonderful resource, online resource. So, yeah.
Why don't you explain a little bit more what you mean on High Street, just for people like.
Okay, yeah.
In case there's other streets where they.
So, yeah, when we started Lee Community Gardens, we started with one garden that was growing food for people, and we really wanted to expand it into the area of pollinators as well, so that we could educate people. While we're growing food for people, we can educate them about the pollinators. So because I live on High Street, I thought, well, why don't we try converting these verges, which are often known as hell strips, because nothing really grows there. You get a lot of salt, get a lot of plow snow on them, into pollinator pathways. The idea is to connect as much habitat as possible around the town so that your pollinators don't have to go too far to find the things that they need. So on High Street now we have 6 verges that we've removed the sod from, and we're in the process of planting. We're going to have a planting weekend, probably the first weekend in June, with about 500 plugs from Healy Native Nursery, and we're going to be planting those all out in those pollinator pathways. And we're choosing plants that are salt resistant. They don't mind the salt. Plants that are shorter, so we're not blocking the view of traffic. and plants that bloom from spring right into fall. So it's an experiment to see how they all survive in that kind of very challenging environment, and to see what kind of pollinators will come to that habitat and will they benefit from it, and also it's a beautiful, if we could do all of High Street and then all of Main Street, I mean, people are gonna come here just because they can look at all the flowers. So,
I would like to mention too.
whoops, what was that?
If we drove by now, would we see anything?
What you'll see is signs that say pollinator pathway, and you'll see some things coming up. There's a couple places where there's some daffodils, which are not native, but they're great for the spring, and there might be a few little green things coming up, some of which might be weeds, but it is in the process, yeah.
I was going to mention.
One is at our last town meeting, we passed a pollinator-friendly resolution.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's consistent with that. The other is we're going to try to post these slides on our committee section of the town website, just so you have all these resources available to you and links available to you.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention too, when we talk about plants and think about the whole season. And we're in spring now. There's some things that are flowering for those early bees and butterflies and whatever else is out there. But as the season goes on, the plants change, and more pollinators will be coming in, different kinds, and more birds. Of course, the birds keep moving around, and then into the fall. So you have plants that still flower in the fall. If you think of your asters or the goldenrod or Joe Pyeweed or some of those other plants. So to keep in mind when you're planting your garden, start in the spring, what flowers and grows, and then through the summer, and then don't forget the fall and whatever coverage you can leave in your garden from those fall plants would be helpful to the invertebrates, the ones that are wintering over. So we do have some of our species here, the invasive ones, so you can take a look at their roots. I also brought the native wild geranium here and the little wild strawberry and helianthus, a sunflower, which are perennials, and they're growing now, but I left them bare, so to speak, bare rooted, so you can see their roots and see how they grow and how they spread. So that's kind of helpful.
But we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions too, so any questions?
How about a juga?
That's like, is that bugleweed? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty plant, but so I don't think it's an invasive though. Is it? Is that? I don't think so. It's like, so the way I look at some of those plants is like, look, if you have a whole bunch of that around, it's not escaping anywhere, and you don't want to like spend your summer trying to dig it all up. Just leave it for now, plant some other things. But if it's in an area where you want to start planting a lot of other natives, then either cover it, like you were saying, and mulch it for a year and just leave it and let it die, or dig it up and that kind of thing. So
I don't want to get rid of it. My question, I guess, it's no mow Mays. Ours gets this tall, with these beautiful purpley spikes.
Yeah.
To me, it's like leave it, let it go, let it flower, let it seed.
Sure. I mean, the thing about it is, so you want to look at what your goal is. So from a purely service perspective, in terms of service to the local ecosystem, it's negligible. I mean, from an aesthetic perspective, it's beautiful. And so between those two things, it provides no value from a service, like habitat kind of thing, and maybe some nectar value. Okay, so you got that. And then you have, it's aesthetically, it's beautiful. So you kind of just have to decide. It doesn't have to be black and white. Like I really try to tell people, look, it might be better to leave that and plant an oak tree somewhere, or small willow, or a serviceberry, or something that will support, you know what I mean? Maybe if you have euonymus or you have any of these really invasive plants, definitely do everything you can to get rid of them, because it's just really not helping the environment. Whereas something like the ajuga, maybe it's like, okay, it's fine, you know.
And it's very easy to pull out.
Yeah,
Where some of these aren't.
yeah, exactly. And they just spread weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there anything we can do about the emerald borer, the ash borer?
I don't think so.
I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can give it just like a 2-year treatment. And unfortunately, we had somebody do the first year.
You
And
have
then he never came back. Are you talking about getting rid of him?
Yeah, but what do you do when you have 200 ash trees on your property?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not practical.
Where we live is covered with ash.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, you have a lot of nice firewood, and then you try to replace them with another type of tree. I mean, that's,
Craft person could use the wood to make some things.
yeah.
So,
What's that? What? Oh, sorry. What were you going to say?
I really appreciate how you had listed beneficial plants, also like the oaks. Which I
Yes.
didn't realize that they were important.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, I see you brought up maybe the worst offenders
Yeah.
for us, which are the ones like I focused my life on bittersweet.
Yeah.
I go out every weekend in the winter with a chainsaw. I go up and I go and I just cut bittersweet.
That's great.
And I go out just so trying to focus on what's most important. I was really surprised when you said lilies in the valley. They don't seem like they're dangerous. Like they're going to wiping out or taking something. Maybe they're not for pollinators or others, but I'm going to focus on the vendors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My list is the bittersweet.
Yes, exactly.
But then there's I guess I'm wondering how bad are Norway maples.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. From all of the, because I looked at my driveway and I've got all these maples, and I started, you can test what they are by snapping a leaf.
Right.
They're all Norway maples.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
kidding you. Okay, this might be my next.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The Norway maples just spread so much. You know, they just
Production.
seed production is amazing, and they're not recognized as a maple by the pollinators that use maples. So they don't really provide anything like that for you. Would think they why not, but they don't. So yeah, that's a good mission. And just to answer the lily of the valley thing, so for someone like me that has like a very small, property in the middle of town, if I have lily of the valley in there, there's no way I'm going to be able to plant native plants into that. It will take over everything. So I have to get rid of those lily of the valleys if I want to grow things in that area. And and anything that you till, even if you till up to the edge of the lily of the valley and say, okay, I'll leave them, they're going to invade that whole area, and you won't have a native garden. You'll have a lily of the valley garden. So it really depends, again, what are you trying to do and what's your landscape like. If you have acres of land with ash trees on it, or do you have a small front yard, with just grass and lilies of the valley? Yeah.
What's your feeling about black walnut?
Oh, black walnut is a good.
Yes.
It's
You suppress the growth of like a ton.
It does of some things, but not all things.
No, a lot of things can grow.
Yeah.
Well, we know.
You just look it up, Google it, because everyone thinks,
Yeah.
oh no, they're allopathic and they, hardly anything can grow. There are a lot of native plants that can
Yeah.
grow.
But that's a little bit not reliable because we've gone by that.
Really?
Some of them, like maples, great. There's
Yeah.
some of them great, and then it'll be like, wait, it said whatever. Which one?
Yeah. Those are native trees, though, and I don't know what their rating is in terms of how many pollinators they support or anything like that, but they
They spread like wildfire.
They really do.
yeah. You might want to control that, or you
Yeah.
might there are some people who love, black walnut is one of the most precious hardwoods.
Yeah. And people
they
use
we
them
just
for
are
dye also.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
walnuts.
You could also turn it into black walnut oil if you have them.
Mhm.
Who has that?
You can also give away this, a lot of people, I noticed on Facebook Marketplace
Yeah.
or Buy Nothing, people will say, hey, I have 15, such and such plants. Anybody wants them, just come by and get them. And so you can even get people to come and dig them up for you. So, yes.
If you want to naturalize part of your lawn,
Yeah.
what are the options?
So there's a guy named Owen Wormser that has written a book called Turn Your Meadows into Lawn or something. Owen Wormser, though, is his name. What's that? Anyways, he's in this area. He's wonderful. But just for you, like one of the best things is like what you guys were talking about is just cover it with cardboard, cover it with a few inches of wood chips, leave it for a year. Or even this fall, you could because fall is a very good time to plant perennials. You can punch holes in the or cut holes with a shovel in there, plant your plants, leave the mulch everywhere. Usually that will kill the grass. And then that way you won't be digging up weed seeds or anything like that. And then you just plant into that. Now, if you wanted to kill it and then put seeds down, then you have to wait till maybe that fall you could see if all the grass is dead. It's a little tricky. Because once you till the soil, it's like you're in trouble because there's a seed bank in there that's just going to be like whoopee.
Open up a can of worms.
Yes, exactly. Pun intended.
Sal's had his hand up.
And then depending on how big your space
Keep
is.
your hand
But
up.
his book is really wonderful. It's easy to read.
What's it called, the book?
Turning lawns into meadows, something like that. But
Thank you.
you'll find it if you look it up. Yes, sir.
I'm cleared a lot of area with my invasive trees, but I do still have a terrible root system.
Yeah.
Now, if I want to plant something similar to what you mentioned, oak trees, and you mentioned willows, which is something I didn't think about, how is that going to, how are those trees, once planted, are they going to sustain in reference to the root system of the others?
Well, that
out.
root system is, what's that? Go ahead.
To dig out as much of the old root system from the undesirable tree, which can take a lot of work, or use a machine to kind of clear it up. You'll never get all of it out, but recently we were taking out, I should say my son was, I didn't get too involved, but a Japanese lilac, which was a stylish thing. It's just that it was dying, but the tree itself was like this big multi-trunk, but the root system, once he took that whole thing down and started to dig, the roots were like thick, and they spread out like 5 feet out into the backyard. So it was chainsaw and digging until he got all of that out to burn, and then backfilled with soil from the yard. But it's a lot of work if you want to do it that way, but that would be a better way in the long term to get as much out as you can.
Well, it depends. It depends too, like on how much maintenance, because maybe some of these things are going to send up little saplings, like when you cut them down. So you'd have to go back in and cut those down. But I would tend to leave the roots, and this is controversial. This is like lots of different ways to do it, but because this is what's happening underground, is that all those fungus, all the mycelial networks, all that kind of stuff is still under there. It's going to start breaking down those roots. Those roots are going to be turning into organic matter in the soil, and eventually they're going to feed those new trees. So, if they're stumps that will re-sprout, you're going to have to go in there and keep cutting those things off so they don't get any food. But those roots will just start to decay because they have nothing feeding them. and that decay will start almost instantaneously, at the very tips, and so if you're, when you're planting oak trees, Doug Tallamy says plant an acorn, and I know, people are like, that takes forever, but it's much faster, it's much cheaper, and it's much easier than bringing in a huge $1,000 tree that needs, you need to get in there with a big heavy machinery and compress all the soil and dig a hole. And, it's if not an acorn, plant trees, that are bare root, because the bare root ones will take over.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Bare root.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to dig such a big hole and.
Yeah. So if you need to chop away some roots or something, it's not such a huge amount.
And you said that they were more successful than these big bald
Yes.
things.
Yes. So there's
Better chance of survival.
You can set the roots out.
Yeah.
Unless you have big clumps of things. The other thing, if you are moving trees, if you can save some of the bark, you can use that for your mulch too, depending if there's no insects in it. But to just break up bark, because that does have a lot of the mycelium and all on it, probably if it's a dead or dying tree, and you can use that around at your edges too.
Yeah.
But spreading the roots out of a new tree.
So it wouldn't affect the root system, the old root system from the invasive species wouldn't affect the new plants.
So if it's a tree like the black walnut that has allelopathic properties that keeps other things from growing, then yes, you that would have an effect. But if it's I'd have to look up black locust or whatever it is you're cutting down. But those roots are going to die. And if you think about a regular forest, right? Those trees are falling down, seeds are landing on the tree and growing right up out of that dead wood, as it's rotting. It's like the trees are falling down, the roots are still there, and other trees are growing up right around it. So if you're choosing a native tree, definitely do a little research and, ask some tree experts, if you want to just get down to the nitty gritty. But my sense of it would be, don't worry about those roots, because they're already in the ground and they're going to rot there and add the nutrients to that soil. So, yeah.
Like make a berm over it.
That's true too, yeah.
And plant in the berm. So
that's a very good idea.
And I was telling them we had so many of the ash and things cut down. What I did, because I'm not going to pay for somebody to come and dig up all those, stumps. I cut out the bottom of those big barrels, those big plastic barrels, put it over the plant and put soil in it and then planted in it. And my husband just knocked one over the other day, and it's practically gone. And this is like in 4 years that it's practically.
What did you plant inside the container?
Plants.
Like flowers?
Yeah, flowers and stuff like that.
Okay.
And the soil just rotted.
Deteriorated the stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yes.
Bare roots was mentioned, and so I wanted to see if I could talk a little bit about the tree project. It's a little off topic, but
Sure. So there's this cool Liberty Trees. It's if I get some names wrong, you guys can fill me in. But the Liberty Tree Project is an organization that's offering towns and cities free trees if they want to plant them in memorial of soldiers that have died from the Revolutionary War through the Civil War or through the World Wars. So we have 42 trees coming this year at some point to plant all around the town. And one of the young interns that's working with the town, she's chosen some really nice native trees that will be planted, and we're hoping to get mostly bare root so that the thing is with bare root is you have the roots haven't been constrained by burlap or haven't been cut, when they're dug up. Yeah. So that when you, yeah.
And it spreads, so you can see how it grows. It does have a very woody stem, underground stem, I'll call it, but it sprouts out all around. But this is something, if you are transplanting within your yard or for somewhere else, you might want to wash it in a bucket of water. Because here is another plant, the wild strawberry, which I pulled out. The tiny little strawberry with white flowers, yellow flowers instead of white flowers, and a tiny, tiny tart berry. But when I was pulling that out, and you can see that has its own roots, but then there was this little guy stuck in there. And you might not notice. Think, oh, I didn't have my glasses on, and I'm planting that. So if you kind of take out a lot and maybe swish it in a bucket of water, and then you could see if you have any other travelers with your plants. So you don't want that in there. But that's basically like bare rooting.
Yeah, with the trees,
The
the reason it's better is just because trees are so big and bulky,
Yeah.
and if you want to get something that's tall, it's quite a lot of work to do that. Whereas if you have a bare root, it's much easier to plant them. And even if you just get, I've gotten from the New York Department of Conservation $25 for 25 trees, and they might be this high. We have a couple of black cherries that are now at least 8 feet tall that I planted a few years ago. And they started out like this tall, and they were $1 each. So it's so those are some really easy ways to kind of get things growing without having to spend hundreds of dollars and hours of time replanting and stuff.
Where was that from?
The New York Department of Conservation. If you look up New York Department of Environmental Conservation trees, and then they'll take you to a site that shows you. I think you can still order if you order before May 1st. Anyways, but it'll give you all the different trees and shrubs that they have, and you can get them sent to you. I'm getting like 75, like a Virginia rose, which is a native rose, serviceberry, which is a beautiful smaller bush with white flowers, and winged sumac, which is also very good for pollinators. So it's like $100 for 75 trees by the time you pay for shipping. So it's a really economical way, and those things are going to grow fast. So we have lots of stuff up here for you guys to look at. If you want to come and ask questions of any one of us or share stories. If anyone wants to share a story now before we all get up, that's fine.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.